Hello, and welcome to a very, very special edition of How I Did It, where we are tackling the pre-planning for NaNoRenO in March. Today we're going to talk a little bit about scope and scheduling for a game jam like NaNoRenO. So scope is basically the breadth and width of your game. It's what you can accomplish in the time you have, with the personnel you have, with the budget you have. And you don't want to go over scope because then you'll add the stuff you don't need, you won't be able to polish it. So you want to kind of keep things tight. So for something like Nano, where I know I only have a month, I don't have to worry about things like personnel and budget because it's just me. It's just me doing stuff. So I have to focus on time. Now, generally speaking, I like to leave this last week of Nano. That's when you for polish and QA. By the end of the 24th, I want to have what I would consider like a passable game, where if I had to release it that night, it's like, oh well, okay, sure, it would be doable. I wouldn't be super bummed about it. And usually what I mean by like passable, the writing's done. I've got all the sprites and backgrounds and CGs I want in. It's got okay kind of basic structured UI. And I may be using public domain music. And I probably would leave out things like effects and a lot of the kind of nittier, smaller things. I consider those polish. So those are things I'll be adding in the last week. So then I think about how much I'm able to put in as far as work a day. Reliably, I'm going to say 5 hours a day. That is just kind of like the way my schedule is, buying a new house, all that kind of good stuff. That's just kind of what I'm going to be able to manage on my current schedule. Obviously, there are going to be days where I can do more than 5 hours, but they're going to end up balancing out with the days that are going to come up where I can't do anything. And those are the things to take into consideration. I'd much rather underestimate how much time I have to work than overestimate it. So 5 hours a day for 24 days. We do a little bit of math right here. 24 times 5, bam. So we're looking at a total of 120 hours that I have to reliably get a game to like a reasonable state, which I know I can do. I've done it in less. So now it's just a matter of dividing out how the labor is going to work. I typically like to go ahead and presume about 5 hours for just general UI, doing the art, getting it kind of programmed in, but a very basic UI. That's just kind of how long it takes me to get things looking where I think they're nice. And that's one of the ways I'll probably end up having to cut back. And I also like to assume, maybe like 2 hours to sort of set up the basic code. And that, what I mean by that is like getting the variables ready to go, setting up colors. That also kind of applies into UI. So basically a total of 7 hours of like UI, setting up code, setting up variables, if I need to do narrative branch programming, that kind of stuff. RenPy makes that very, very easy to do, so I don't have to spend a lot of time on it. I'm also not including some things that I'm going to be including later. That's just like basic work that I make sure I set aside ahead of time, because later I'll be including some of the more like complex work. So that leaves 113 hours. Now, I know how I work because I've shipped several games and I've kept logs of all of it. And I know that I can reasonably split up writing, sprites, backgrounds, and CGs by 4. I know that I'm going to probably spend about this. I could reasonably spend the same amount of time on all of them. So I'm going to use it as a base. I'm going to take that 113 and split it into 4. That gives me 28 hours each. From here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to assume 28 hours each. So I'll go ahead and put writing down as 28. But I'm going to take that extra quarter hour and I'm going to put a little floating hour right up here. Now, I'm not actually going to put sprites and BGs and CGs as 28. I'm going to put them down to 25. 25 hours each. And that would leave 3, 6, 9 hours floating. The reason I'm going to do that is because I know how long it takes me to do a sprite. I generally can do a sprite in 3 to 4 hours. I can do a background in 3 to 4 hours, sometimes 5. I can do a CG in about 5 hours. The thing is with sprites, though, I also have to take into consideration post-processing, getting things right, putting them where they need to be, all that kind of good stuff. And so I can comfortably bump that up to 5 hours. Same thing with backgrounds. If I want to do multiple variations, I'm going to bump that up to 5 hours. So if I just assume 5 hours for all of them, that's why I went ahead and rounded it down to 25, make the math a little better. So that means I can probably do 5 sprites, I can probably manage 5 backgrounds, and I can probably manage 5 CGs. Where it gets tricky with writing is, typically speaking, I could probably reliably say I can do about 1,000 words in about 90 minutes as far as just straight up writing. And I do a little bit of programming as I write, like as far as like the tags of characters and stuff. But that's where the writing gets a little more complicated. See, I was saying as I wasn't including all the programming in the quote unquote programming label. That's because some of the programming of like sprite movement and sprite expression and stuff, that is reliant on how much writing there is. So the longer the story, the more of the sprite expression changing and sprite movement and blah, 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 I have to include. So that's going to be more reliant on the length of story. So instead of using 90 minutes for 1,000 words, because I'm not expecting this game to be overly programmatically complicated in regards to asset movement, like I don't think I'm going to do any moving backgrounds or anything. I'm going to choose not to because it's a nano game. I don't want to overcomplicate things. I'm going to go ahead and include and say it's going to be more like 2 hours for 1,000 words. So if I have 20 hours available, divided by 2 hours per 1,000 words, that leaves me the ability to maybe hopefully hammer out 14,000 word story. Now, can I write a good story in 14,000 words? Yes, I believe I can. I've done it before. Because what I like to think of as far as like how a story is going to be written, think of it like a parallelogram. So you can write a story that's got a whole lot of endings, or a story that only has a few endings, or like a little kinetic novel, so there's no endings. As long as the area stays the same, that's how much story you can do. So 14,000 words accounting for all the possible endings I want to do, and I kind of want to do more of a wide story than a long story. I want there to be multiple ways the story can turn out. I'm going to be focusing on a story structure that looks a little bit more like that. So ideally, I want to do 3 endings with maybe 4 variations of each ending, depending on which love interest you bring. So it really comes out to like 12 unique endings. And, if I want to do that in this number of words, there's going to be a lot of crossover and a lot of overlap and a lot of like, okay, so I'm going to do the scene, but only like 1 or 2 things are going to change. Ugh, okay, fine. Now you'll notice I also have up here 10 floating hours. So I have 10 floating hours that I can distribute how I see fit. And here's the thing, I don't know that I'm going to do 5 sprites. I'm going to do 4 for sure. I don't know if I'm going to do a 5th one or not. I don't know. I got to figure out a way to put the customizable main character in there. I may have to cut that. 5 backgrounds. Well, I'm going to have to figure out, do I have 5 backgrounds? Maybe I can reduce it down to 3 to give me more room for CGs, or I can cut CGs completely. And that's kind of where I come down here and I figure out, okay, what are some things I can reliably cut? And what are some things I can add if things get more if things get really, really smooth and like I can keep going. And I know I'm going to cut CGs as a possibility. That would be the thing I would cut first. Just get rid of them completely. And then I would also cut the customizable sprite for the MC. I would make the backgrounds still available, but I would probably cut the sprite down. Now I also have to take consideration if I have a customizable sprite for the MC, that's going to change up how the CGs work. Those are all things I kind of have to keep in the balance. Because if I have to do variations of CGs, well, that increases that number a little bit, and something is going to have to get cut from the rest of my work. Other things I might cut, I might cut down the number of endings. Don't know if I can cut down sprites. I want to leave it at 4 for sure. 5 for the MC, maybe. Backgrounds, I'm gonna have to go through the outline of the story and figure out exactly how many backgrounds I need to tell the story. What I may have to do is make the UI even more simplistic. Again, I have these 10 floating hours. I can sort of intersperse where I need it. Now, if things do go smoothly and I'm way ahead of schedule, I'll add my effects, I'll add my sound effects, and I may even add a more complex UI, just to make that simple UI a little more fun. Now, I also have to take consideration, I'm going to have to worry about stats. Maybe. I'm keeping that as a possibility if I can find the time to find places to insert stats. And that being kind of a core mechanic, in theory, means it's going to be a matter of how many variants of scenes I can do. So I'm taking all of these things into consideration to balance out my scope. And I am going to have to decide a lot of these things after I figure the outline out, because you can still make some decisions regarding your scope and what you want to accomplish as you're putting out character sketches and figuring out your outline, that kind of stuff. A lot of this isn't quite set in stone at this exact moment, but will be by the end of the month. I'll do writing first, so that'll be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So this is going to be writing right here. I'll usually do that first. Then I generally do sprites next. So 5, 10, let's see, it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. We'll say here's where sprites start, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So we'll say sprites are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sprites are here. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are going to be backgrounds. Then right in through here is probably when I'll do UI. Keeping in mind that I'll probably do the basic coding somewhere in through here, depending on how I decide to write. Probably this leftover day. Yeah. Probably do UI through here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then this is probably when I'll start tackling CGs. It'll be the last thing I take into consideration. And that leaves me a couple of days. This is my 10 hours of float time of figuring out, okay, what stuff is going to go where, adding things, subtracting things, pushing things. And that leaves me still time to polish. So this is my basic overview of like how I intend to tackle this game from a scheduling perspective. For the next video, we are going to tackle the outline of the story and figuring this out so that this 14,000 words I have to work with, I can see where they can go. And that's going to be tricksy, but also a lot of fun, because that's the primary point of a visual novel, is the writing and the reading. And so I hope you will join me for that to get even more detail onto how we are making this game for NaNoRenO.